So I just want to welcome you guys all to the first webinar in our 2021 Dive into Data webinar series. For those of you that were around last year, we started this webinar series last year with the idea of just kind of spreading some of the knowledge that we've gained while working on DataStream, and also giving a platform for some of our other collaborators to share some of their knowledge around data. If you want to view last year's webinars, I'll go through at the end, I'll post the link, but you can check it out at our datastream.org webinars page, as well as on our YouTube channel. They're all recorded there. With that being said though, today's webinar that you guys are here to hear about is standardizing water quality data. Is it worth the headache? I'm your host for today, Patrick LeClair. I'm a data specialist here with the Gordon Foundation. The main project I work on is DataStream, which I imagine some of you may be familiar with. For those of you that don't, DataStream is an open access site for water quality data. It's free for anyone to use. People can upload their data and then use DataStream to share that data, as well as to do some visualizations. You can find out more information here at datastream.org. So now we got kind of the business stuff out of the way. Let's dive right into the webinar. So today the question we're here to answer is standardizing your data worth the headache? And the answer is, it is. So that's it. That's what we're here for, is to get the answer to the questions. So I hope you guys enjoyed the webinar here today, and you guys can stay tuned for more information from DataStream. Obviously, this isn't the whole webinar, but the answer to this question often seems very easy. It's really easy to say, is it worth it? Should we standardize our data? Yes, is the quick and dirty of it all. But today we're going to kind of delve into why yes. What are some of the benefits and how can you go about doing that? So a quick overview of what we're going to talk about today. Now that we've got the answer to the question we're here for out of the way, we're going to talk a bit about what is data standardization, why you should standardize your data, and how to do that. And then we're going to go into how us at DataStream have implemented our data standards, and then when you should standardize your data. So what is data standardization? I've got a couple of different definitions here. Some key pieces to kind of pull out of this. Data standardization is bringing data into a common format that then allows for collaborative research. Data standardization is making sure that your data is internally consistent. So all of the data within a data set agrees with each other and follows some sort of pattern, that all of the data has the same content and same format. So if you look at two separate data points, they'll have all of the required information and be the same. And it's the first step to ensure that your data is able to be shared. So you need this data standardization is the first step to be able to share it and give it to somebody else and make sure they can use it. So overall, what is data standardization? It's taking that data point that you've received, putting it into some sort of common format that other people can then use, and making sure that you're following that format across all of your data points within that data set. So some standardization, not just only of data, but of things, happens quite common. It would be really hard actually for you to go through your day-to-day life without running into or having the benefits of standardization. So, things like language, there's standards that we've agreed upon that allow us to easily communicate. We all agree on them, we've learned them, we implement them, and it allows us to improve our communication and share ideas and thoughts. The metric system, another standardization. This allows for me to say, I want a bridge that's 10 meters wide, tell you to make a bridge that's 10 meter wide, and the bridge to be the right size. It doesn't allow for me to say, I want you to do this bridge and then you make it a totally different size. There's an expectation and an understanding of what a standard meter looks like. And then there's verbiage and vocabulary that goes around that. Another one is chargers. So phone chargers have a variety of different standards. We've got this XKDCD comic also pointing out another one, which is dates. Dates are one that people are really trying to push standards on, and you'll see them in a variety of different ways, and you yourself may use a variety of different date formats. But this can be confusing, but there are standards for everything. So why should we standardize? what's the benefits of this standardization? So I'm going to take the example here of the phone charger. As some of you may have in your home or may remember having in your home at one point, it used to be really common practice to just have a drawer full of cords, chargers for everything. Get a new phone, you'd get a new cord. Then when you were done with that phone, you wouldn't want to throw the cord out because you may need it someday, so you'd throw it in the drawer. You get another device, it would have a different charger, you'd throw it in the drawer, thinking maybe later someday I'll come back and I'll need that again. And then when you'd go back to get the charger, you'd find out it doesn't exactly fit with the new piece of technology you have. So maybe you'd have to buy an adapter or go out and find another cord. This is a really problematic, this is a really big problem. Not only was it creating a large amount of waste, but also really just creating a lot of clutter and a really difficult process for trying to get a charger. So to solve this problem, the EU decided to, was kind of the one leading the head on this, and decided to try to put in some legislation to lead people to having a common standard for chargers. This is what they agreed on. It's a USB-C. If you have a phone other than an iPhone, you will notice that you have a charger that looks like this. Just like with the metric system, the majority of the world takes a standard, but there always will be outliers. In this case, Apple, they want their own charger. But the EU went ahead and decided, we should have a standard charger that everybody should use. We should have one charger to kind of rule them all. So what were the benefits of that? What are the benefits of having the one charger? Well, one of the things is interoperability. So if I have one charger and it's at my house and you come over to my house and your phone dies, you can use it to charge your phone. If I go to get in the car and I want to plug my phone in to listen to music, you can do the same thing as my phone. So it allows all of these phones to interoperate and use the same technology to do the same things. Second thing is reusability. Like I said, the charger that you throw in your drawer and you're like, oh, don't worry, I'll get back to that. I'll use that someday. Oftentimes doesn't really get used. It just sits there. Or to be used, it needs an adapter or something, to help modify it. So having the one charger allows you to reuse the charger over and over and over again. This really is a huge thing, especially when you talk about reducing waste. Today, obviously, is Earth Day. And when we're talking about Earth Day, one of the big things is that we talk about is waste reduction and reducing greenhouse gas emissions. By having one thing that you can use multiple times, instead of having to recreate it all the time, you do reduce wastage. Another thing is quality. By having a standard charger, we're all going to get the same quality of charge. So your charger and my charger, no matter what phone we have, are going to charge at the same speed. This is great because it ensures, quality control and ensures that everybody's getting a similar kind of product. And finally, it reduces cost, both in time. I don't have to go and find a new charger every time. I don't have to go buy adapters. I know that I can use one charger for everything. And it also reduces money cost. I buy one charger and I keep it for 10, 15 years or until it breaks. I use it to the end of its life instead of having to buy a new one every few years. So what are the charger equivalents in data? How is this charger to data comparison? I usually like in these, if you've seen my data management one, we talked about the water bottle. I do try to use some real world examples because often this data stuff can seem very abstract, where it's really commonplace and we deal with it every day. But what is like the equivalent to this in data? Well, the equivalent to this in data is non-standardized data sets. These are the chargers of the data world. As you can see, I've got 4 different data sets here from 4 different organizations, and they're all very different. They're all laid out in different ways. They all have different names, organizations, but they're all trying to say the same thing, right? It's like the charger. All of those chargers are trying to do the same thing. They're trying to charge your device, but they're all slightly different because that organization thinks that this way is slightly better, and this organization thinks that that's slightly better. And this causes a lot of issues, like I said, around interoperability and reuse and quality. So these 4 different data sets, they could all be for the same lake. They could all be for the same watershed, or all, within the same organization, but they're all totally different. And what this causes the issue is it's hard to compare them. They're all talking about the same thing, but they're talking about it in a slightly different way, which can be really confusing and can take a lot of effort to try to bring them together. So obviously the solution, the solution to this is to do like we did with the charger, which is bring it into one standard. And that's what we're going to kind of talk about here today, is this idea of bringing things into one single standard. Now, in terms of data, especially science data, how does bringing things into one standard help us? It does all the things the charger does, but it also does a few other things. So one of these things is it helps with what's known as the 80-20 science dilemma. So what the 80-20 science dilemma is it's this idea that 80% of a researcher or scientist's time is spent just getting data, acquiring it, documenting it, putting it into the right formats, integrating data from different data sets, and putting it all together into one final product that they can then do their research on. Then only 20% of their time is actually spent on doing new and novel research and pushing science forward. This is a huge problem, especially for any of you that have had to go out and get grants to pay for yourself to do any sort of analysis, or people who understand how much to pay to just go out and collect data. You end up spending a lot of your money and your time going out there and just collecting the data instead of spending your time actually moving kind of your field or science forward. This can lead to replication of data efforts. You're going and recollecting data that somebody else already collected because it's not usable, or you're just spending your time doing mundane tasks like copy and pasting. So by standardizing data, you're able to reduce this 80-20 dilemma so that you don't have as much of that 80% and you're giving yourself more time to actually do new and novel research. Now, something that's a little bit unique to water quality data is it actually has a little bit more need for standardization. And that's just because of the nature of the information that you need in order to understand water quality data. This became really apparent in a study that was done looking at data from the United States Geological Survey, or the USGS. There was a study done where they said, okay, we're going to look at what challenges people face when trying to reuse water quality data. So what challenges do people have when they say, okay, this water quality data was collected for this purpose or this specific study. Let's take that data and let's try to reuse it for another study. Let's try to see if there's enough information that we can confidently say that we have this new research based on old data. And the results were pretty shocking from this study. Out of the over $20 billion worth of data, this valuation comes from the cost to collect and store the data. They determined that over half, $12 billion, was determined to be ambiguous. What this meant was that there wasn't enough metadata with that data point to fully understand what it was trying to say. So some key things they ran into errors were with inconsistent naming of characteristics. Temperature, for example, does that refer to air or water? What is the temperature of? They found a lot of inconsistencies with method speciations and sample fractions. So when you're comparing to maybe metal measurements, one is total and one's dissolved. You can't compare those two. They're extremely different, but there was no information along with the data to let people know which was which. And same with method speciations. Now you've got, atomic weights and stuff that really do affect your results. So they found that the majority of the data was ambiguous and therefore couldn't be used, and only 8.2 billion was unambiguous and had enough standardization. So this was a huge issue for this organization, and so they went about trying to focus more on standardizing their data and putting their data all into one standard. So how do they go about standardizing their data, and how does any organization go about doing this? It's all comes down to data standards. So what are data standards? Again, a few definitions here. Data standards are technical specifications that describe how your data should be stored so that it's consistent and interoperable across many different systems. They're documented agreements. So it's not just some thing that exists in your head, or maybe is one spreadsheet. They need to be documented. There needs to be, some sort of process as to how you got there and what the expectations are. And they also need to be agreements, both within your organization and without. They define a frame of reference so that everybody's kind of looking at things the same way, and encourage confidence because people know they're all talking about things, the same things. So overall, what are we trying to say here? Data standards, it's a technical document that you create that outlines how the data should be stored so it's done consistently, and it needs some level of confidence and agreement between the parties involved so that the standard can be used by others and have all the information that the larger community agrees needs to exist within the data. So how do we implement data standards? Okay, we know what data standards are, but how do we go about taking this data standard and putting it into our organization? Well, there's kind of three different ways that you can look at going about implementing data standards. We have them in this order for a particular reason. The first one is the one that you should do first, and the third one is the one that you should do last. So the first is to adopt. The best case scenario is to adopt existing standards that already are out there. This is the most helpful because these standards will allow your data to interoperate with the largest number of users. It'll make sure that it's meeting best practices within the industry. And often these larger standards have a body that's focused on improving and modifying the standard as the sciences change. Now, sometimes when you go looking for standards, they may not meet 100% of your needs, but if the standard meets the majority of what your organization is trying to do, you should do your best to try to adopt that standard and meet its needs. Not every standard is going to be 100% perfect, but if it's meeting most of what you need to do, the benefits you're going to get from moving towards that standard far outweigh just kind of working within your own organization. Now, if there are no standards out there that meet the majority of your needs, but there's something that's kind of close, that's maybe, kind of just adjacent to what you're looking at, or maybe it's a standard from another field, then if there's something that's close enough that you can maybe manipulate, that's when you should adapt a standard. So that's when you should look at other standards out there, maybe in a different field, or maybe that are super broad, and try to adapt it to the needs of your organization. Again, this will ensure that you're going to get those benefits of having one standard that's used by multiple people, and it's going to ensure that you have all the information you need. Now, if you do go the adaptation route, it's very crucial to document how you've adapted that standard. What changes have you made? That way, if you need to go back and translate your data into the original data standard, you can go about doing that, or people can follow the changes you've made, and that helps to breed that confidence that we talked about earlier that people need in order for your standard to be acceptable data standard. And finally, if there's no standard in your field, there's nothing kind of adjacent, there's nothing remotely like what you're trying to do, only then do you create a unique standard. This should be a last resort. And sometimes it does happen, not every type of data, not every field has a standard, but so, there sometimes is a need to create, but it should be something you're looking at doing, when there's no other options. So there's this XKCD comic here that kind of outlines a bit of what often happens in terms of standards, why sometimes they proliferate and we have so many of them. So you have 14 different standards. They're all slightly different. They all are missing maybe one or two pieces of what somebody's looking for. And they go, this is ridiculous. We need to build one standard. It's going to cover all of the needs for everybody all of the time. And then they make a new standard, and now there's 15. Because the people using the other ones are like, oh, well, this is slightly different, but it doesn't totally meet my needs. Instead of saying, okay, there's 14 standards, let's try to pick one and adopt it and work within its confines. Very often people like to create something that's different and they think is better, but it ends up just further splintering the conversation. It's better to adopt a standard, become involved in that standard, and help to kind of shape that standard to better encapsulate your needs and the needs of the entire field that you're working in. So how did DataStream kind of go through this process ourselves? How did we end up with our data standard that we use now? So we started working in the Northwest Territories with the implementation of DataStream, looking to create an online portal for water quality data. In working with the government of Northwest Territories and across the region, we noticed there was a lot of differences between each jurisdiction. So this would be different monitoring and research priorities, different methods. So there was so much difference from region to region that it was really hard to kind of bring all this data and all these groups together. We tried to do that, and we found it was really inefficient to combine these data sets as they were in different formats, had different wording. So it was really inefficient. It took a lot of power and effort and work to just try to manipulate these and boil them down to something that could then be cross-compared. So we found ourselves kind of up against this really complex and difficult problem that we didn't think was, when we got into this, we didn't think that the problem we were going to run into was data standardization. We didn't think this was going to be kind of the crux of what we were working at. So with this new problem, we kind of said, okay, we can't be the first people who have run into this, right? This isn't a novel issue. There's got to be other people who have run across the same problem. How have they gone about solving this? So we went and looked at what was already out there to kind of look at standardizing and bringing data together. We considered a number of other Canadian and international examples of standardization, but the one that we kind of started with was the United States Environmental Protection Agency's Water Quality Exchange data model. What was great about this data model and really was appealing to us is that it focused on water quality data. So it was within the, it was really going to be good to adopt, like I mentioned before, because it was within the industry that we're working in and specifically dealt with the data type we were interested in. They had a wide variety of users. So DataStream knew that it would be working with government officials and researchers and communities. And the WQX model was already being used to meet the needs of all those groups. It had great potential for expansion. Since this was one of the largest data models in the world, we felt that it would be easy to bring outside of, at this time, just McKinsey DataStream. It would allow for interoperability across the border as well. So once we kind of settled on this, we did a comprehensive review to ensure how this would fit, not only within the Canadian context, as this was an American system, but also how it would meet the needs of our users. Through this and consultation with a lot of our advisors, we kind of came across the idea that, yes, this seemed like a great model, and we decided to adopt the WQX model. Through this adoption process, we found that we had actually great support and really good collaboration with the team at the US EPA who was working on WQX. And this is one of the benefits we didn't really think of when getting into this, but by using an existing standard, there was already a group of people who were thinking about things the same way as we were, and were really helpful for bouncing questions off of and getting support from. So with that, we decided to implement the WQX model for our observation level data within DataStream. But then, there was other as we've gone, there's been other things that we've implemented and we've needed to use standards on. So some other standards we've implemented for our data set level metadata. We've looked at the ISO 19115 and schema.org data standards. And at a technology level for our API, which is what we use to connect to other computers, we use the REST REST standard. And by using these standards, it's really helped us build what DataStream is today and allowed us to leverage a lot of technologies more efficiently. So with that being said, I'm going to show you guys, these data standards in action and how this kind of works within DataStream. Okay, so the first thing we're going to look at here is the what a data standard looks like from its most abstract and I guess technological form. So this here, what appears to be a large screen of text and numbers and very confusing is our data standard in a machine readable format. So in order to test the data and do a lot of the technological sides of things, we've had to put our data standard into a machine readable format. And this is obviously really complex and hard to look at and hard to decipher. So it doesn't, we don't come in and mess with it from here. We kind of compile a bunch of information to make this. And so a level kind of below an abstraction is our GitHub repository. So this GitHub repository is open. So if you are on GitHub or familiar with GitHub, you're more than welcome to come in and poke around and take a look. This is where we store information on what changes we've made to our data schema. It's got all of the different pieces. So what allowed values we have, what allowed values we've added, what allowed values we've maybe removed. It's also, and then we take all these pieces and we compile it together to make that other piece you saw. You also are free and open to come in and drop any issues in here. So if there's something that you see that's missing or wrong with the model, you can come in here and let us know. It's just a way for us to, have it out there so people who really want to get into the nuts and bolts of it all can jump in and get into the nuts and bolts of the data schema here. But this probably isn't how most of you are familiar with our data standard. How most of you guys are probably familiar with our data standard is through our Excel template. So I'm just gonna pull that up here. So the Excel template is a way of taking that really big, wordy, impossible to read document and putting it into a more human readable form. It's really great to have our data standard in a machine readable form. It allows us to do a lot of the checks, but having it in human readable form is also really helpful because it allows people to use it. So you'll see here our data standard. Basically, it's just a way of telling you what columns need to be in your data, what the names of those columns are, which ones are required, and then maybe what formats need to go in. So you'll see here, for example, location, latitude, and longitude is required, has to be in decimal degrees. Some other ones are things, like dates and time formats. This can be one of the most difficult ones. And then, adding to what the names are for different parameters, and then also what kind of units and what those units need to look like. Now this again is still kind of a big document. It's 36 tabs. So we've further also broken it down. So we start with this huge complex kind of machine thing. We've broken it down into its constituent pieces to build that. Then we've broken it down to this human readable format. And then the next step we did is we broke it into these different tabs. So these 4 different tabs, dataset metadata, monitoring locations, characteristic metadata, and results, take this big data standard and break it into these kind of bite-sized chunks. So you just need to know basically the data standard for each individual piece. So for the dataset level metadata, this one is mostly based off the ISO 19115. That's why you'll see things here like ISO category. This is a category that specifically comes from there. And it's a common format that's used by a lot of people for dataset level metadata. We also break down here into monitoring locations, where you'll see all of the columns are red. This means that all of them are required. Characteristic metadata, and then results. Now, once all these pages are filled in, then only then do we bring it all together into the giant data standard that has all of the columns and all of the data ready for it to be uploaded to the system. Now, something else we've done too to make this process a bit easier, besides breaking it up into its constituent parts, is through adding data validation and conditional formatting into the data set itself. So you'll notice here that some of the columns are yellow and some are red. The yellow columns identify columns that are optional, so you don't need it to put the data onto DataStream, and red is to identify columns that are mandatory. When you go to put something in, so let's say I'm here and I'm like, oh, well, I measured temperature. That's a common thing. I'm going to put it in here. When you go to put it in, you'll notice that it stays red. Which a lot of people might go, well, that's weird. Like that should be the correct one. Now, if you go to the drop down here, you'll see that there's actually a number of different temperatures. Often we make our own assumptions about our data. We go, well, I recorded temperature. It's water quality data. Obviously, it's got to be water quality temperature. But, we have lots of groups doing water temperature. Sometimes they're doing the temperature of air. We also take sediment data. So we need to kind of break it down. And so by having a data standard, it ensures that we're getting the most out of your information so other people can understand. Another one, if somebody puts in something like ammonia, our conditional formatting goes through and makes sure that it also alerts you of other data standard violations that may occur. So for example, ammonia, this is a nutrient that was a big part of the ambiguity in that USGS study we talked about earlier. And you can see here that two of the main things, method speciation and sample fraction, now become red. These are things that are important for ammonia. You need to know, whether it was measured as N or as NH4, but then you also need to know, the sample fraction. Was it filtered or unfiltered? Because that makes a big difference in how the data is going to be interpreted. So we've taken all of these pieces, we've taken this data standard, and we've broken it down, and we've tried to make it as human readable and understandable as possible into our data template. But that doesn't always catch 100% of every case. Obviously, sometimes as some of you have formatted your data, you get everything together, you think it looks good there, and then you go in to put it on the site and you run into errors. So that's why we have, because we've put it into a machine readable format, we're able to do things like this, which is when you go to upload your data to DataStream, I pick a data set here, it's going to kick you back these errors and let you know which rows were affected and what the errors are. This is really beneficial because it helps you catch some of the errors in your data. For example, result value should be greater than or 0 and less than 14. This is for pH, to help catch people from putting pH values that are outside of the limit of pH. It also maybe helps you catch a little mistakes. Maybe your date was in the wrong format. Only through having a data standard that we apply to and are rigorous with are we able to do things like this, which is really helpful, ensures the quality of our data and ensures that people are putting up data that at least meets some base level of standing. That's something we hear from people a lot, is how do we ensure the quality of our data? Well, this is a big way here through our data standard and validation of that. But once it's all said and done, the data validation, this can seem very self-serving. What does the user get from putting all the effort into putting their data standard? Because we do understand it is a lot of work. And going through all your old formats, putting it all together, putting it into the DataStream format, can seem like a lot of work, a big struggle, and very tedious. But that unlocks such a huge level of potential in your data. Only through the standardization of your data are we able to create things like our Explore map, which allows us to go in, see all the different points of data on the map, see who's monitoring in different locations. Only through the standard are we able to then filter by organization, characteristic names and regions, and really break down to what we're looking at. We need a data standard to be able to have all of the coordinates and know where those coordinates exist, know that they exist, and know that they're in the right format. The data standard also allows us to do awesome stuff like create the visualizations that we do in DataStream. So, because of standardization, I'm able to click on a random data set, open it up, and know that there's going to be a visualization here. Only because of data standards am I then able to compare all of the different coordinates from this site and be able to look at them. We need data standards to create these products because we need to know that all of the data on the site is in the same way. You may see from other data storage places that they don't have data standards, and there's definitely a time and a place for places that don't have one universal data standard in order to upload data. But in DataStream, since we are dealing exclusively with water quality data, we really see the importance and the value in this. And this is only just the beginning. We're going to further increase, the amount of products we're able to offer. One is our API. So what this allows people to do is programmatically pull data directly from our database and filter and pull out the data they want. We're also in the process of creating a new download tool for the site, which will allow you to download data based on maybe region and characteristics. So let's say you just wanted to download all of the pH and temperature data for the province of New Brunswick, or maybe your watershed, maybe just for the St. John River watershed. because we do this standardization and because of the work of people putting their data onto DataStream to do that, we're able to unlock all of these tools. And that's only just the beginning. It's also, will unlock the potential for researchers, for machine learning, for AI, to then take this data and use it to make some of these big changes and put data into action. Yeah, so that's kind of the big, why and how we kind of use data standards and how those data standards, allow us to, do all these different things in DataStream. So when do we start to standardize data? When should you start to standardize data? Well, the truth is earlier is always better. It's always easier to, at the beginning of a project, before you collect your first data point, before you determine what you're going to collect, determine what that data is going to look like, what your end product is. Only by understanding what the end product is and what standards you need to meet will you even know what you need to collect. But if you haven't already started with a data standard, let's say you are decades into a program and you've been kind of every couple of years making a new Excel sheet that's slightly better, or you have a new somebody come in who tries to revolutionize things, that's totally okay. It's better late than never to implement a data standard. There's always a chance to start today or tomorrow to standardize your data. We've worked with groups who have data dating all the way back to the 1960s to get all of that data together into one standard and help them move forward so all the data can be the data usage can be maximized. We've also helped groups with PDFs and Word documents and Excel files. You name it, we've worked with it. It is possible. And then once you get that standard in place, now it's really easy moving forward because you don't have to think about that all the time. The standard has it covered. We spend all our days thinking about that standard and making sure the data has everything it needs so that you don't have to, so that you can confidently take the DataStream standard and use it and know that your data is going to meet the needs of the vast majority of the community. So a quick recap of kind of what we spoke about today. So what is data standardization? It's a process of putting all your data into one common format to improve the quality and trust in your data, as well as to allow for easier collaboration and sharing. So why should we do this? Well, it increases the reusability of your data. It increases the interoperability, so looking across data sets, and the reliability. It allows people to look at your data and be able to reliably determine, is this fit for their purpose and is it answering the questions that they have? It also reduces costs, both in time, in trying to bring data together or reinvent the wheel every time, as well as money. So it makes it so that if you collected data 20, 30 years ago, you don't have to go and try to recollect the same type of data. You don't have to keep doing background studies all the time. You can kind of have your data and have that continue on. So how do we do this? The main way is through data standards, these kind of technical documents that outline what the data needs to look like, what is required to exist, and how that exists. And we do it, we want to do that through the adopt, adapt, create. So we want to adopt existing standards. That should be our first step. If there's no standard out there that really meets the majority of our needs, but there's something close, we can adapt that standard. And only when there's nothing else out there and we can't find another solution, do we then go about creating a new standard. Now, when should we do this? Like I said, sooner rather than later. And that's kind of what we're here at DataStream to do. We are here to help you through this process. So if you are interested in starting this process of standardizing your water quality data, please reach out to us. You can find us at one of our 3 hubs, Mackenzie, Atlantic, or Lake Winnipeg. You can also follow us on Facebook and Twitter, or send us an email to datastream@gordonfn.org. We'd love to hear from you, and we'd love to take a look at your messy data and help clean it up. You can also find the recordings for our previous webinars at our webinars page, and information on webinars that are coming up.